views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to Bronx Talk. We have a real fun show for you tonight. When older people hear that this year is the 50th anniversary of Co-op City, it brings back memories of what was on that land before Co-op City was built. For people who were in the Bronx between 1960 and 1964, they will fondly remember Freedomland U.S.A., an incredible Bronx amusement park that was in the shape of a map, and I'm doing Florida here and Texas, of the United States. Younger people who were not there at the time are generally amazed when they hear tales of this place where you could actually put out the historic Chicago fire, or you got to go on a donkey or burro ride in the old Southwest, and there was so much more. It was all right where Co-op City now stands. We have photos and stories about Freedomland tonight as we welcome the author of this new book that provides the definitive history of Freedomland. This book, Freedomland U.S.A. Please join me in welcoming the author of the book, Mike Virgintino, to Bronx Talk. Nice to have you with us, sir.
Nice to be with you. Thank you.
This, hits like a revelation for those of us who are around. It's like, wait a minute, who remembers who we really are? Tell me about your fascination with Freedomland and what made you say, you know what, I ought to go crazy and put it down, because there's a ton of stuff in it.
There is a lot of information there, and I can tell you there's even more information that never even made it into the book.
Well, let's start with what's in the book, okay? But really, what drove you to say, I'm going to put a volume together, and it's an impressive volume about Freedomland?
Well, I grew up right outside the park, maybe about 10 blocks away, and we referred to the section where Freedomland was located, and now Co-op City is the Valley, because we were up on a hill. And every day going to school as a child, we would look down into that valley through the side streets, and we would see Freedomland. So we saw it every day of the year, whether it was open or not.
As it was even being developed.
Yeah, I was a little younger at that point, but I recall more when it first opened or soon after it opened. And I started writing about Freedomland maybe about 15, 20 years ago. Magazine articles, online publications, but I had become fascinated during my college career and later with American history, and I realized what started my interest in the Revolutionary War, George Washington, the Civil War, goes all the way back to Freedomland and how that affected me.
That's actually pretty dramatic, because I mentioned that it was in the shape of the United States, and they were literally, you could go around the park in essentially the direction of going to Chicago, or going to San Francisco, et cetera, et cetera. And it never occurred to me it would strike somebody that way, but I guess this book is the end result of the impact.
Well, it also in the book I include memories of about 15, 20 baby boomers who were kids like me at the time, and several of them who were very prominent in the Civil War community, as historians said they got their interest from the Civil War attraction that was at Freedomland.
We want to show many of the pictures. We have a little video we're also going to show. But I just want to get a little background. There is a connection to Walt Disney, and the guy who put it together was related, and then was connected to Disney, and then apparently they did one of these. And so give us just a brief history, if you will, of the creation of the park.
Well, the fellow you're talking about is C.V. Wood. His friends would call him
Cornelius Vanderbilt Wood.
That's right. And he was working with a company that the Disney brothers went to help them develop this idea of what would become Disneyland. And once they figured out all the analytics that were needed for that time to create a park in California, Woody was brought on board, and he's technically the first employee of Disneyland. And he helped bring Walt Disney's imagination to life. Everything you see in Disneyland in its first few years of operation, Woody had a connection with. Well, yes, they did have a falling out. There were constant frictions, as there are in any organization. Some say Walt couldn't take Woody any longer and wanted him fired, and he had his brother Roy do it. Some say Woody was getting a feeling that something was going to happen, and he decided to leave. But what he decided to do is, since he was on the ground floor of the theme park, he knew everything. The vendors, how to put it together, the financial situation. He created his own company and built his own theme parks.
And the theme park that we're concerned about is the one that he built is Freedomland.
Right, correct.
There are so many pictures to show, and I want to make sure we get to a lot of them. So we're just going to roll out some of the pictures. We also have some memorabilia here. I don't know what we're going to get to, but let's just start right up. So here you're going to see right up on the screen there is a map of Freedomland. This was like the promo card.
This was the first year program guide that you buy for 25 cents when you walked into the
We've
park.
got one on the desk, actually, an actual program from Freedomland.
And other than one or two pictures in there, everything else is the artist's rendition of what Freedomland would look like, because this program guide was put together actually before the park
was
opened, but had to be available on opening day.
And so for people in the Bronx, now this to me is one of the most revealing shots, because here we are literally looking down on what people know as Baychester Plaza and Co-op City.
Right.
And this was the map, and I had talked about it being exactly like the United States of America. This is where they put the park.
Now, if you look closely where approximately Florida and New York and the Northeast are, that's where buildings are standing today. The rest of the park is where the shopping center is. And if you go beyond California, there's a little more land there.
Go west, young man.
That's right. If you go in that, just off the picture there was supposed to be a 300-room hotel known as the Freedomland Inn that was never built. But when they were building the indoor shopping center a few years ago, they struck concrete. They didn't strike gold in California. They found the foundation of that hotel.
Yeah. Which never got built. All right, let's roll some of these photos. This, of course, is the famous Chicago fire, and people would come out and put it out, allegedly, of course.
Right.
And anything you want to say about it that I didn't mention?
This fire at the beginning of Freedomland would go off about every 15 minutes, and as the years progressed, you maybe had every hour, every couple of hours, because the flames were handled by gas jets. So depending on how often the fire went off, the price went up for
because
gas.
using the gas. Oh, my goodness. All right, keep it rolling. Because this is, I'm joking, but this is about like where Donizetti Place is in Co-op City. This is the entranceway.
This is the entranceway. The park. We would be standing in the parking lot looking at the entrance. You see the building in the upper left there, the 3-story building. That's a recreation of Macy's original store. And it was a functioning store. It wasn't just a prop. And so you would walk in from the park to little old New York, and approximately this area is where the Co-op City Library is today.
Ah, there you go. So you really do know where all the things are.
Sure.
All right. One thing I want to mention, here you can look at one of the old cars, but one thing I wanted to mention that you talk about in the book, the day that it opened, there were so many cars. People were so excited about being there that they literally had to use all of our neighbors.
All the side streets, as much as a mile or more away, people were parking.
Kingsland Avenue and Baychester and all the way out there.
And then people would walk to the park.
Incredibly popular.
There was even about 12 o'clock that day, disc jockeys on our radio stations were telling people, don't go to the park today. The parking lot is full.
Wow.
But people just kept coming because it was also Father's Day.
It was a preview day that it opened?
The preview day was Saturday. It opened officially on Father's Day of June 19th, 1960.
So everybody in the Bronx said, why not
not
Bronx
go?
and elsewhere?
And people probably wanted to get to see Pat Boone because he cut the opening day ribbon.
And there were many other stars who were there. I mean, I saw a list of the musicians that played, from Diana Ross, the Supremes, and the Temptations, and Smokey Robinson, the Motown Revue.
Right.
Unbelievable. Bobby Rydell, Bobby Darin. I think there's a picture of him. All right, let's do some more photos here. Oh, so
There's Bobby Darin.
Bobby Darin.
This, he's on stage at what was the Moon Bowl. The Moon Bowl was created for the second season, 1961, so they could bring more name entertainment in there. Some of the big bands, such as Harry James, Benny Goodman, but all the performers, the solo artists, as well as the groups, would perform in the Moon Bowl.
Paul Anka and Cousin Brucey was out there plenty. I remember that as well. Right. All right, let's let it rip.
This is one of the most popular attractions. This is the Civil War ride. And the reason why they included the Civil War in Freedomland at that time, it was also the centennial of the commemoration of the American Civil War. So what
that's right, 1960.
Right, 1960 to 64.
Right.
So what you would do is you would get on a horse-drawn or mule-drawn correspondence wagon under a flag of truce, and you would actually go between the lines of the South and the North as they're firing above you. If the cannons are going off, the guns are going off. What's interesting about this and a few of the other attractions, we hear about Disney, when you hear like Pirates of the Caribbean, the audio animatronics of the characters. This also used the early stages of audio animatronics. And
so it really was innovative in addition to kind of being historic and educational and all these other things.
That's correct. You may remember from the World's Fair the oh wow moment when we saw Abraham Lincoln, which was a Disney-sponsored attraction, actually stand up.
Right,
and
the president. Yeah.
Well, that was the early part of audio animatronics, but a few years earlier it was here because Woody had worked at Disneyland, so he knew the people who could create this.
The other philosophy, which you do see if you go to Disney World in Orlando or Disneyland out in California, when you talked about R.H. Macy, they have actual stores in there, so it is part of that same model. All right, more pictures, more pictures of Freedomland.
This is on the Great Lakes. Even though it was marshland, they did have to create this large Great Lakes. And what you have in the front of you would come out of the New York area of the park, the New York Harbor. This was a recreation of a harbor tugboat from about the 1900s. And then what you have behind that would come out of the Chicago docks would be one of the sternwheelers. There were two. One was the Canadian, one was the American. And they would use the same waterways, but they were separate attractions from separate themed areas.
I just want to interject, and you can, folks, you can get to the next picture if you'd like. It's that you say an amusement park, and people think of a roller coaster, or maybe you go to ride Playland or something like. This is like, it's educational. It's like participatory history.
Well, it was actually like Disney. It's a theme park. It's not an amusement park.
That's true.
Though later on in years, they did add some thrill attractions in the final years of Freedomland.
This
is Mrs. O'Leary and her cow.
Oh, who knocked over allegedly knocked over the oil lamp that started the fire.
And you would see her, and I use her loosely because it always seemed to be played by a male actor, walking through the old Chicago area of the park with the cow, and all the kids would come up to the cow, pet the cow, and all of a sudden, miraculously, Mrs. O'Leary and the cow disappeared. And within about 5 minutes, the fire went off, the bells were clanging, the firefighters were running their water pumper
and what a thrill for kids. You think about, you try to take your children for, educational activities and those kind of, what a thrill. All right, let's keep it going. I love these, and I do remember it. There's one, right after this one, I'm going to bring up what my most vivid memory is.
This was in the New Orleans section of the park.
Okay.
This was known as
you make a left at Chicago and you go
you went down, right? You went south.
You went south.
This was known as the King Rex Carousel. That was the Freedomland name of it. This actually was a historic carousel. It dates to about 1912. It was a Denzel. And why it was extremely rare. It was 4 rows, most are either 2 or 3 rows, and it was 2 levels, 2 rows on one level, 2 on another. And the menagerie it wasn't just horses. It was just about, think of any animal you can think of, and it was on this carousel. Yeah.
I want to bring up this ride or this exhibit that was out in I guess in the Old West somewhere, out all the way. You keep going past Chicago, and that is the Casa Loca. And I remember that. What that was, people can't even, I can't even imagine it, and I saw it, is that you'd walk into a house that was slanted, but when you walked in, it was an optical illusion.
That's correct.
So it actually was slanted the other way, and so your visual perception that you were walking like this way, but the thing was this way, and then they would take a billiard ball on a pool table that looked like it was slanted up, and they'd put it down, and the ball would roll up because of the way the building was engineered. You want to add something to that?
A lot of people
Amazing.
remember the Casa Loca.
And I remember it to this day.
And what that was, the premise was a tilted house, and that went back to amusement parks as late as the 1800s, that kind of attraction. And it was one of the more popular ones at Freedomland. You would even, if you remember, on the kitchen table, they would put a soda can, and the table was tilted forward, but the can rolled up the table and out the window.
Absolutely unbelievable. And I will say, we're always looking for, as I said, educational things for kids. My parents would have to stand there and explain to me the principles of reflection and images and all that, which is like a whole science experiment come alive.
Now, you can still see one today if you go up to Lincoln, New Hampshire.
Okay.
There's a park called Clark's Trading Post. They have some of the old buildings from Freedomland there, but their tilted house, which is known as Tuttle's house, is not the same one at Freedomland, but it was built from the same plans. And there aren't many of the tilted houses around anymore.
I'm going to put that on my list for my country summer driving one weekend. And this is?
The Santa Fe Railroad.
Santa Fe Railroad.
You go to amusement parks today and you get the little kiddie railroad or a little bit beyond that. This was an actual train, and they had 2 of them. Those steam engines go back to the late 1800s, early 1900s, and they were on loan from a park a train park that existed in Massachusetts. And here it is just.
So when you would ride again, the wonder of a child to not only we're gonna, like, you go to the Bronx Zoo and you're on the little tram, or you go from one place to the other. You're actually on the railroad.
You're on an actual train. The cars dated from the early 1920s or so. And here it is, this train is just pulling out of the San Francisco train station. The Freedomland train had 2 stops. You could board on or off in Chicago, Old Chicago, or in San Francisco, and it would take you around the park.
You needed a train schedule to do it, a railroad schedule.
That's right.
Go ahead, what's next? And this is all in what we know as Co-op City. It's crazy. All right, next. Do we have a next photo? If not, there we go.
Everyone remembers the gunfights.
Right.
This took place.
I've seen that at Disney World too. At Disneyland.
But they've changed it much. It's much more choreographed today. A lot of these cowboys were actors. Some of them had appeared on Broadway. So they knew how to do pratfalls and how to fight without actually hurting someone. This would take place in the center of Fort Calvary, out in the Great Plains section of the park. And the fellow whose back is to us was the first marshal at Freedomland. And as you can see, the crowd around there. And once in a while, one of the bad guys would take one of the kids. If a parent was holding a young kid, they would go and grab the kid and hold the kid for ransom, and the kid would start yelling.
Yes.
So there was interaction.
Let's take a look at one more photo, and then I do want to roll this video, which it's not technically part of the book, but it gives people a chance to see what Freedomland was like. This is when Co-op City was starting to be built?
This is a rarely seen photo. If you look at the first few buildings
on the
in
right
the
or
picture,
the left?
The ones all the way on the right and into the center, the ones on the right is where Satellite City The Cape Canaveral type of themed area was located, and the Moon Bowl, the entertainment area. The buildings to the left of that would have been Little Old New York, and in the distance right between them would have been the entrance into the parking lot that you would have gone.
And in front is?
In front is where the shopping center is today, and where 5 of the theme areas of the park were located. You can see in the foreground here, it looks like a little horseshoe, that white horseshoe.
Right.
That is the foundation for the Freedomland Inn.
Wow, that's what you
hotel,
were talking about
right.
earlier.
And where the trees are just beyond it would have been the Northwest Fur Trapper ride. And to the left, you see a little outcropping of buildings. The last building standing was one of the bucket houses for the Sky Ride. We called it a bucket house.
Right. Where did you come up with all this information? I think we're done with the pictures there. So.
Yeah, I would, as I say, I was always fascinated with Freedomland. And I started writing about it maybe 10 years ago, 12 years ago, first with some magazine articles, and then as online publications came about, writing there. And then I started a Facebook page, a memory page, about 10 years ago. And I just didn't want to place pictures up there and say, oh, do you remember this? I wanted to tell the story behind it. Who were these people that built the park?
And then it was just a matter of...
And then it was just... developing it more and expanding it more to go into deeper research.
Absolutely fascinating. I don't know if we're going to roll this whole video. I want to show this video so all the things we're talking about, people can see that it come alive a little bit.
Sure.
So this we pulled off of YouTube. I believe this was a promo video for Freedomland.
Right.
Let's let her rip.
Yep, here comes the 4th Cavalry Stage, right on time, moving along the lonely road through Indian country, heading west. Ha! Ha! That'll reach the Rocky Mountains by sundown. Up on top, you could be anywhere. The trail doesn't have any signposts after you leave Fort Cavalry. You could be anywhere on the Great Plains in the 1800s, when the West was really wild. Now, this may be Indian territory, and it may look like the Old West, but the time is today, and the place is Freedomland, a big entertainment park in the Bronx, in the state of New York, just half an hour by subway from Times Square in New York City. Here, they've built the places and the buildings representing 200 years of American history. And riding shotgun across the Great Plains is only one part of the story of our country. Hey, what's happening over there in Chicago? Fire! Look at that! It's the Chicago Fire of 1871. Hurry up, men. We're going to need volunteers for this one. Everybody man the pump. We've got to get water on the fire or the whole city will go. Faster, men. Keep that pump going. Mrs. O'Leary's cow has kicked over a lantern, and the flames are spreading fast. Keep that pump going back there. It's getting out of control. This fireman doesn't look very worried. Here at Freedomland, they have the Chicago Fire every half hour, every day. And the gas flames behind the windows of those fireproof buildings always go out on schedule. But it's lots of fun because it's make-believe. In Chicago, in 1871, they didn't have fireproof buildings, and the big fire was an important event in American history, brought to life at Freedomland. Down on Cortlandt Street, they've built little old New York, just the way it was between 1850 and 1890. In those days, horse-drawn trolleys were the latest thing for short trips in the city. If you had to go out of town, maybe as far as 5 miles, you rented a horse if you didn't have one of your own. If you planned a real long trip, 100 miles or more, you took the train. There's the Santa Fe Railroad train, getting ready for the long, dangerous journey to San Francisco.
All right, there you go. And from today's perspective, it's just unbelievable. Certainly we know what is on there now, but living and breathing American history right there in the borough of the Bronx. Why did Freedomland not last, and why did we end up with Co-op City instead of this park that could have grown and developed over time?
Well, as I mentioned before, the park was on marshland. William Zeckendorf and his Webb and Knapp company, and he was the real estate baron of the day.
We've got about a minute to do it. Go ahead.
He was the baron of the day. He wanted to do other things with the land, and so did Mayor Robert Wagner, Governor Nelson Rockefeller, Robert Moses. They knew that the South Bronx was going to start having its issues as late as the late 1950s, as early as the late 1950s, and they wanted to keep the people in New York City. So what they did...
I'll tell you, having studied that, and with Decade of Fire that's out now, people can trace what more about what you're saying, but I can follow it pretty well.
But they couldn't build those apartment buildings on that land because it was marshland, and they had to wait 20 years to drive pilings in the ground to see if Eastchester Bay tides...
Freedomland almost paved the way for that.
That's correct.
And it didn't really make any money.
Well, there were 2 books that were found later on, and some said the books were cooked to make it look like a failure so that they could declare bankruptcy and wipe it clean so they could build Co-op City.
You know, again, with the Decade of Fire that's out there now telling the story of when the Bronx was burning, this all fits in very well. But listen, we want to enjoy at least the memories of Freedomland. The book is Freedomland U.S.A. Now it's out, right?
It's been out, yes.
It's out. It's available wherever books are sold, online.
Only online.
Only online.
Through Amazon, eBay,
and all that kind of stuff.
Barnes and Noble.
Michael, looking back, you had passion for this to begin with. You know, what do you think of it now? That you've studied it? Do you have a different opinion of it? Has it taught you anything, or is this exactly what you thought it was?
What it did teach me is that there's always a behind-the-scenes story. The public did not know that Freedomland was only built to last 5 years and then be cleared for
because the World's Fair was coming as well, right after.
Well, and that's an urban myth. A lot of people say the World's Fair affected Freedomland. It had nothing to do with it.
The book, Freedomland U.S.A., The Definitive History, Michael Virgintino, thank you so much for sharing this. Memorabilia, there's all kinds of stuff. What a treat. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Folks, if you have further questions or comments on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, then or now, email them to us at BronxTalk@BronxNet.org. You send us a tweet at BronxTalk, or you can post them on our Facebook page. Next week, a very big show. All our shows are big. Borough President Ruben Diaz Jr. will be our guest. Thanks to producer Helen Greenberg. The director is William Guzman, Nick Marrero, and we will see you next week. Freedomland.